make sure they're good. I'm just going to test out get them to give us a thumbs up. So Mark and Gabrielle, can you give us a thumbs up if you can hear us okay? Okay. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge, okay? Especially when we start pointing at the map. So we may have to make some workarounds or some adjustments for the technology, especially as people are talking about different pieces and that. So we do have you on the camera. You're pointed at dear old Lauren now, so great. If you have problems hearing, we have tried to repeat questions and whatnot sometimes, but this hybrid approach, we are not really technically set up for this just yet. So if need be, I will walk you around as the talking heads to hear the questions a little bit better, okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you everybody for attending. What I don't know, I don't see any additional people on electronically by Zoom today. Is that correct, Jennifer?
Yeah, nobody else.
Nobody else
That's it.
is on?
So it's just.
All right, then if they say we are what we are. So welcome, I'll call to order the meeting. I think we just go one. This is the agriculture working group here, working committee working group meeting, September 1st. I would ask if there's any pecuniary or other conflict of interest that should be declared by anyone at this point in time. Hearing none, we'll continue on. There's an agenda in front of us here that has been drafted for the purpose of this specific meeting by Jennifer and Jennifer. I would ask for approval of the agenda by someone here, please. Bev? Seconder Denzel, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. And there's a set of minutes that came with it from the previous meeting. The people had an opportunity to have a look at that set of minutes and have reviewed it. And if they think it's worthy of approval, I would ask for a motion for approval of the minutes. Don? Seconder? Denzel, thank you. And we have no specific delegation today. We do have, in addition to the existing agricultural advisory committee, we have with us today Deb Maplin, who's here as a representative of the Federation of Agriculture, and we have Bruce Hudson, who's still with ARMPAR, Federation of Agriculture, and with the Ontario Farm Competition Association. Thank you for coming today, Bruce. Business are many listed there. So I think we're going to move on. I think what we'll do is work this through the process of the new business on a stepwise procedure. We will, and I haven't had a chance to talk specifically with Ken and Mark as the roles within that area, but that will become clear as we go along. It will allow for questions as we go through that. And then we, of course, have a position for a roundtable with questions in addition to what come up during the periods. Theoretically, the meeting will be 12:30 to 1:30, as prescribed by Merlin Napton, who has had a sudden good excuse for not being here today. But I have a physiotherapy appointment at 2:30 that Jeff has to get me to, so we do have to get out of here today. Okay, so the G1 current versus proposed prime agricultural designation map. Mark, are you picking up on that?
I can hear you. We'll do what we can here. So I'm not sure if you heard initially. I have to turn off at 1 just for a short period of time, but Gabrielle is going to lead most of this anyway. So if you don't I'm going to stay with my ears. Just I got to look somewhere else at once, so don't mind if I'm kind of distracted at 1 o'clock. But Gabrielle and I have talked about the agenda and today's meeting. But yes, I do hear you. I'm hoping you did receive the full-size hard copy prints. I believe electronics were submitted via our Mindcast as well, because there are large files. So you do have them electronically as well. And Mr. Heslop, one of those does actually include the soil capability, which is basically the basis of that is the CLI soil mapping that we've been exchanging back and forth. So that actually does represent that, just in a different, because it's just using colors through GIS, but it is pretty much in large part the existing Schedule A as well, which was based on the soils mapping. So that was also the basis to the LE component. So the 70 points is based on that soil mapping as well. But Gabrielle can get into further details as we move forward in the agenda here.
I'm familiar with that. We probably go offline with a bit more discussion on that. Could I just ask one little addition here that I thought of based on the discussion I had before we started? The other component you sent out in that email, which is the ability to go into the municipality lot by lot and look at the numbers in there. Not everybody has been able to do that successfully yet. Is there a possibility electronically that can happen during this meeting, or is that something we should try and do elsewhere?
Probably what would be best is well, we can share the screen, but then we'd have a hard time this way. I think just looking at how it's working right now, I think we'd have a hard time for understanding where it is you want to send us, unless you have an address. So the system is set up with municipal address or roll number, so we can actually get to properties that way, and Gabrielle could do screen sharing. But again, now I'm not too sure how you guys are seeing my screen. But I know we do have the option, and Ken, maybe tell me, am I projecting right now on the large screen
Yep.
in council? Okay.
So if you share your screen, you'll be up on the two large projection screens. So.
Okay, so Gabrielle, in their council chambers, they actually do have an overhead projector with a large screen. Now they might have to shut the blinds down and close the windows off, but hopefully they'll see.
Oh, that's
there you
perfect.
go. You can see. Oh my God, look at me in full size. I have more hair than that, guys. Believe it. And now you're reflecting. Oh my God. Yeah, so we could do full screen and actually do the GIS. What has been added to the GIS, and we've just kind of held off providing it today at 11 o'clock. And Gabrielle will show you what we've done is we've received about 30. I'm not too sure if the word submission is the right word to use, maybe more emails, either inquiries in regards to, can you explain what this means? Or I would rather not be part of this study, or some emails even saying, I would rather not be part of this project. How can you exclude me from the project? But we've had, various types of questions, some even proposing that they remain agriculture because they want the more strict land development policies to avoid having the introduction of rural commercial, rural industrial in their neighborhoods or their areas. Sorry, not really neighborhoods, but in their areas. So we've had a wide range. What Gabrielle has done is she's put those in a spreadsheet. So we have all of the 30 people, give or take. And in her on the GIS, we actually put a little pop-up box, and she kind of summarized what the concern or the comment was. And the idea, we were trying to see if there was kind of a sense of where all the comments were coming from. If there was a specific area that, everybody in that area is against this or wants to provide an opinion. And tell you the truth, they're all over the place. So I don't think that, I think the committee will have access to that. We can provide the link during this meeting, so you can try it after this meeting. For those that don't have proper internet at their place, I'm sure Mr. Kelly could find a room at the municipal office now that you guys are able to go there with COVID rules. Maybe there could be an office set up with a GIS capability, or maybe you guys even through a workshop session. Once, Lauren, I'm sure you'll figure out how to use this software. It's fairly simple once you get the hang of it. Because yes, what we've done now is on every single parcel, you could click on it. It'll give you the breakdown of the LEAR, the different criteria, and how each parcel scored. And there's also a little identifier now, which is a little pin that Gabrielle dropped on it. When you click on that little identifier, it'll tell you who commented, what their comment was, and you can kind of see where those are as well. So I think that's as far as we are right now. Really what we're looking for is to get some recommendations or directions from the committee, either in terms of larger areas that are, because as I think as we've been indicating over the past meetings and speaking with Chris Curran, our GIS expert, there's a lot of interpretation as to when do you stop that 250 hectare area. And you'll see even when you look at the scores that a lot of the abutting areas score 40, score 60. And it's just because when we spoke with John O'Neill, it was, well, you continue until there's an actual divider. And that is creating somewhat problems because a lot of those abutting areas until we get to a divider are not prime ag, are either rural residential or are actually been severed for future residential and are now being captured in this analysis because of that generic comment of continue your block of agricultural lands until there's a natural divider. So I think that's where we're looking for some opinion. I think the large blocks of ag are what they are. It's when should we actually stop, and where are there areas that really shouldn't be in this mapping? And even Gabrielle and I are looking at it now, and we're saying, yeah, like there's areas where we're really questioning, should it actually go to this road? Because I understand it follows the guideline approach that John's providing, but it doesn't make a lot of sense on the ground. So again, we're not going to go through all the 30. I think we got 31 right now. Tanika just sent me one. I guess you guys were having a meeting, so I just got an email from Tanika as well. So we'll add that to the mix. So there's about 31 comments. I don't think we want the committee to focus on all 31, but you will have access to them, and there might be a general recommendation from them. There are some specific parcels where we will ask the committee to spend a bit of time in reviewing them. And we'll point those out following this meeting. So I think right now we wanted to know, is the committee comfortable using the data that's out there, the GIS that's out there, and kind of working as a committee to provide an opinion or recommendation back to us that we can then analyze? That's in large part what we need from you guys.
Listening. Mark, maybe we should also, so you're asking a question to the committee, how they want to work, I assume, and are they comfortable working with the GIS? I think the next piece, and I know Lauren had, I think, added this to the agenda, which was the process, right? So like we had talked about like a template of the committee would provide us with their thoughts or recommendations or reconsiderations or what have you. And that would be the document between the committee and you guys as the consultant. So I think we also need to talk about, are they comfortable with the GIS? How do they want to work? But also, what is that tangible piece of what does the committee say about this parcel, right? And what does that look like as the, we'll call it the formal flow from this committee to JL Richards. So I'll just explain maybe a little bit more on that.
I'll reframe or explain what different, maybe different perspective, maybe not. But we've got two issues here. One is the public concern, and one is the special properties in, out, and things that could be considered. And to load the committee and say, okay, there's 30 of these, and figure out what they need. And I worked with Ken and said, Ken, sometimes it's better to take a small number of those, represent a small number of those, and have the committee look at those, think through them, and see if a process looks obvious from that. And if a process looks obvious from that, let's at least draft the process out of that and get that back in again so that we've got something tangible that says this is the thought process the committee recommended to look through these situations. And because we don't do that, you go into a mess of 30, and you might have a good process by the time you're done, but you might not either. So and I think that may be the type of thing we want to talk about with a couple of examples.
Okay. So I think that's where you asked Mark where the patterns were. Like, I don't know if you want to use patterns as examples, but you did ask Mark to give you a couple of examples of where people have made submissions.
Yeah. And it sounds like they've done some grouping and maybe,
well, they've done some grouping, but there doesn't appear to be any grouping.
Well, and that,
Yeah, but I will.
It is, you know, it's random, but still within the randomness, we're gonna look at them and say, those glow, those are serious, those need to be looked at, that thing, and we can go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, so Gabrielle will walk you through that in just 5 minutes here, and she'll be able to kind of show you on the GIS where they are, and she can actually show you without even having to go through the spreadsheet. She can actually click on her identifier and show you. So Gabrielle, ask Gabrielle to do that in just 5 minutes. The one thing that we had talked about, Mr. Heslop, last time was the committee would provide us some recommendations and at a bigger scale in terms of maybe just putting an identifier on the map. Area to be considered with some kind of a highlight area or areas that really should be excluded for reasons A, B, C, D. And I think what we had indicated was as long as we have a rationale to why area A should be added or area B should be removed, we shouldn't have any issues getting through the approval authority or the reviewer being OMAFRA in this case, but the approval authority being Lanark County. So they'll rely on OMAFRA. But so I'll say basically going through the approval process. So as long as there's some justification to why we're making the proposed revisions, we're happy to take your recommendations, but that's where we're at. Is I think that's why I wanted to give you guys some hard copies rather than everybody trying to figure out with the GIS. So even if there's one leader there that you guys, when you're working through the maps, one leader that would then actually kind of put an identifier, and even if it's just pencil drawing in an area or Xing out an area, we can always revisit that and tell you how we've refined it. I'm not asking you to go to the individual lot lines, but if you have specific areas that you want us to revisit, that would be a great help to us.
Good.
Gabrielle, are you able to maybe now, unless the committee wants to go somewhere else, I'm thinking maybe now would be a good time to maybe show them maybe a quick walk through the GIS again, show them how the functionalities work again, and since everybody's going to have access to it, maybe zoom in on a parcel. If you can show them how the existing Schedule A is identified versus the proposal, and then maybe walk them through the different identifiers, and they all seem to be running along the river, but I'll let Gabrielle show you that.
Sure. So we could start with just going through both the existing and proposed layers. So as you can see here, when you're in the interactive map, you want to press this green button down here, the layer list. So this identifies all layers that you'll see on the map. And once you open the layer list, you'll see all applicable or active layers here. So if the check mark is checked, that means that the layer is being displayed on the map. So I will just kind of expand some of those that are of interest. So by pressing the small arrow beside the check mark, it provides you with kind of an image of what that layer is and what it appears like. And it will give you multiple kind of images, just say if a specific field is being represented by more than just one color. So what we'll do is we'll also look at existing prime agricultural and rural. Those are, I would say, the most of interest, maybe a village boundary. So I'll just zoom in for like here, just as an example. So what you're seeing here is some prime existing agricultural that's being overlaid with what we are proposing. So as you can see here on these particular properties, existing, they have both rural and agricultural designations, but what we're proposing is to extend that line to a natural barrier, as Mark had mentioned before, so that we don't have partial designations and that our proposed prime ag is following natural and human-made divisions, whether that be in this case it's a river or a major roadway sometimes, or a village or settlement boundary. And so what you're seeing on this map right now is in each parcel, in the center of the parcel, you will see the LEAR score that the parcel has received. So if you go ahead and click any one parcel, you'll see how the score is divided. So you will see the total LEAR score here, and it's further broken down into the LE and the AR components. So the let me just find the LE. So the LE criteria is fully based on CLI mapping. So as we've discussed before, the CLI mapping or the soils classification represents 70 of the total 100 points that we have attributed to the LEAR score. So you could see that this particular parcel has scored 40 on 70 for that soils classification. And then you will also see the 3 different factors that contribute to the area review or AR score. So that is made up of conflicting land uses, active farming, whether it is or isn't actively farmed now, and then total score. And then, sorry about that, then the third AR attribute is up here. So that's the parcel size score. And so altogether, those 4 different criteria, one making up the LE section of the LEAR score, and then the AR, which is those 3 other factors, make up the total score here. And so you could see that for each parcel. And then you can also kind of see what it's being proposed in terms of designation, if anything, as well as what it's currently being currently designated as. And so in addition to these layers that were in our existing LEAR mapping, what you can also see are the inquiries that we received. So I will pan out just to show you kind of how they look in space at a broader scale. But all of the inquiries or questions or comments or concerns that we received are mapped here, with exception to a few that recently came in and we didn't have time to map them yet. But if you scroll in, you can press the red circle, which is the inquiry. And what it provides you is basically just its unique identifier that we assigned. So they're given that specific number just based on the order they came in. So this is the 13th inquiry that I kind of processed in this whole tracking system. And then there's a status that's just kind of for internal purposes, whether we've responded to that individual about their concern. You get the individual's name as well as the address that they're concerned about. And this is something that still needs a little bit of refining, because these are just kind of personal notes to me at the time. But it gives you a small sort of recap of the concern that the individual had. So in this case, they got a letter saying that their lands are going from prime agricultural right now to rural. That's the proposed change. And they're just wondering, in this specific case, how long that will take. Maybe they're looking to sever in the future and want to know when they would be able to do that, if should their property actually be redesignated as proposed, which in this case would be rural. But as you can see, the inquiries are kind of spread across all over the place. From my review of the inquiries, some have to do with just the concern or just wanting more information about the change or the proposed change in designation. Some concerns are more so about them not agreeing, whether that be that they don't agree with that change to rural or designated ag. Some people have said, you know, my property is kind of on the fringe of what's being designated, and it's a small, just say residential property with rock outcroppings. Why is my property being proposed for agricultural? And then some want to, you know, are concerned about being designated as rural because that allows for. Oh, hello.
Jump in for a second there, Gabrielle.
Sure.
I don't know if it's the resolution of our projector on this map, but we can barely see like you do have red dots and numbers, I think.
Yeah, maybe what I can do is
you can't see the like the pattern or how spread out they are, because you can't really see them. If
okay.
you zoom in a bit, do they disappear if you zoom in?
No, what I'll do is I'll zoom in and that way we can review, just say in this area, there's a few more than the rest. So maybe I'll zoom in. That way we could focus on these and we could kind of scroll around across the map and pay attention to particular inquiries.
So they're barely showing up over on that map. Just in case people can't see, can you see like a yellow highlighted number with a red dot? That's what they're saying are that's what they're saying are those submissions. And it does look like they're kind of all over, but just in summary, what we saw there a minute ago, I think in summary, there's 2 questions here. when Gabrielle was talking about the property line or the existing overlay, and then you could see the land move to the river and where they had put the proposed boundary. I think the question to you is that okay? Is it okay? Like, what are your comments on it? Then there's another question on these individual parcels. So there's kind of two questions at play. Lauren, I don't know if you want to focus on one or we do both at the same time, but is that did you have a particular, did you want to start with the larger areas like you had up on the screen before you went into the submissions, or do you want to focus on the submissions, Gabrielle?
I think at this point, maybe getting a sense of the general areas of concern may be of more help, because these inquiries are quite specific and specific to the sites. So, there might be some overlap actually between areas of concern in the committee versus the inquiries. So I think we should start broad in terms of areas of concern and then go into specific inquiries should we have time. But these inquiries aren't going anywhere. So maybe we could start with broad areas of concern just because they might be easier to tackle at this point.
Do you want to go back to, it was basically James Naismith Way area by the river where you were talking about the overlay and then the proposed. I just want to make sure people can see what we're trying to show them here.
Would this zoom in be helpful?
Yeah, like zoom into, it's actually James Naismith Way and south, I think, or southeast.
Okay, southeast. Let's go that direction. Sorry about that. It looks like it's taking a little bit of time to load up. Would this be like this area?
It's between County Road 29 and the river. It's just before you get to Alma.
It's about here, is that right?
Yeah. So this area right in here. So what the question, as far as I understand it, and they'll tell me when I'm wrong, but I'm just trying to make sure that people are seeing the question. Sometimes there's not always relevant the question to what we're seeing. But you see this pink area? That's the agricultural overlay that was currently in place. Now, what they've done with their mapping is they've extended it out to this purple line. So you see the purple line up there? So what they're saying is this is what exists or what was in the past. They're proposing to extend it out. And the reason, and I assume that that purple line is just a little bit off because of the like you can see a part of don't worry about that one. That's more like resolution.
Yeah, that's resolution. And I think what it is also is that it just follows the water line, but different data sets have different water lines. So this part's complex, right? Because, sometimes it's probably covered with water, sometimes it isn't. So this is supposed to essentially be the shoreline in this case, but that's always changing, right? Just given how there's, like sediments either added or taken away.
So you remember how they're saying, well, NAFRA has said continue with the blocks until you get to a boundary. So what they've done is this agricultural overlay, they've extended it out until they get to a boundary. The boundary is the river. But you can see that what we're saying is, does this make sense to you? And I think this is a pretty good example because what they're saying is, if we extend it out to the river here, to the natural boundary, we're picking up this little area up here. You can see the property, how they've been broken up. This is a new development, James Naismith Way is where it actually is. And, is that the intention? Or are we okay with this? To extend it out to the natural boundary, that makes sense. And we capture these areas. So these areas are now going to be designated as ag. Even though this is 5 or 6 large residential lots, like we're getting building permits on those now.
Yeah.
So that's just, I'm trying to illustrate. So what I think JL Richards is asking you is general comments on doing things like this. So where should that boundary be extended out to the natural boundary? And you go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Where should it not? Just in general.
Gabrielle, the classification of the soil or the land between the ag land and the boundary line, what would it be? You're looking at,
Sorry, so your question is, where would the soil classification information
what
be located on?
sorry, what would be the soil classification for that area?
Oh,
Right where you have your cursor right now, between the purple line and the productive agricultural land, what's the classification in there? What is it capturing it in there?
yeah, so basically I don't have the exact classification in front of me, but if you do press the parcel, what you see here is that it's scoring a 14 on 70, which means that it's probably one of the lower classes, like it might be like a 5, 6, or 7. But also one thing to keep in mind is that soil classifications aren't always, it's not only always one class over a property. It could just be a mix of classes. So this might be like a piece, just say class 6 and a piece class 7.
Gabriella, I agree. It is the benchmark that so many of us have used for so long, and that's why I think it's not a question. But see, the other half of that is, you've got land there that's going to be developed, you know it's going to be developed. You just go in and put the boundary in and then do a minor variation later, or do we use some logic at this point in time? If we use some logic at this point in time and move the line back, then we'll get property owners in there that will let us spread manure on the productive agricultural land. So, I'm sorry, I'm creating a discussion. I'm not offering opinions on the table right now. So I think you brought a really good question to the table. Can we have some comments from around the table? Denzel?
Well, yeah, I guess in reference to what you're discussing, that would be a concern of mine too. If that area, I guess that overviewed area, if that's going to be agriculture, then I guess the example you bring up is null and void. But if we bring it back, is there going to be a concern within that area?
Well, it's just gonna get a minor variation and take it out of agriculture anyway, because those are already property owners in there that they have a right to build a house there.
But
Yeah, again, I'm throwing an argument, that's all.
as the property owners change, the people that are there right now may not say anything about it, but the new people in may say, oh, geez, I'm concerned about that.
Yeah.
So how do we address that issue?
Yeah.
If I could add one thing, I think what might be helpful is that maybe if we haven't already, we could provide 2 maps. So maybe a map that includes the previous or the existing prime ag, and then also what's being proposed. And the committee could actually highlight areas that they're concerned about in terms of, they're dealing with this sort of issue where, their purpose or their use right now, or their intended use is residential, and, they're low scoring, but because of this 250 hectare approach and this cutting at the natural or man-made boundary approach, they've been included, right? Maybe a good idea would be to highlight almost on physical copies of maps, areas where you think were improperly designated or proposed for designation, like prime agricultural, if that makes sense. So these might be strong examples of areas that do not aren't fit for agricultural designation, and we could review that and consider moving the boundaries so that they run across property lines of properties that are suitably proposed for agricultural designation.
Does that make sense to people? To have that reference map? That would be good. Yeah, that would be good.
And that's something that, either at this meeting or in the future, that could be done either on this GIS platform or on paper, and then just sent to Mark and I, and that way we could review and almost transfer your findings onto this interactive map or internal maps for analysis and assessment.
If I could just jump in again, I think what we're actually doing is creating some next actions as we go along here, Jennifer, that Gabrielle has just now volunteered to do a little bit of modifying and breaking up some map references, list of questions. And so that can be a very legitimate action for our next meeting to get, let people look at it, bring it in, get it resolved, get it behind us. And, you know, let's move on. I think we may have a process, at least for this major cut. I know Ken likes process. I found that out.
What's that?
You like process.
Please. Live and die.
That's good. That's good. Okay. You have an next example.
Is there another one? You want another one?
I think that'd be good.
Gabrielle, did you have another example of maybe a similar general question like that you want to illustrate?
Yeah, let me see where I could find one here. Just give me one quick second.
What we're doing at this point in time is-
So I think the example we were looking at is among one of the strongest, but let me see if I could find another area. There are some areas where, you know, like a segment along a roadway of small residential country lots are being included, and maybe that's something that we want to review. So let me just find a strong example of that.
Is this not something we'll have access to out in the meeting?
That's the map that Mark actually sent to yesterday. I sent it to you yesterday. We are the fastest map. It's not the fastest map in the world, but it opened up, and to answer a question that Dennis had earlier, you see all the little white lines on there, all those, I think, are lot lines, are registered lot lines, and so on.
Yeah,
Analysis is done by lot in there. So you got 100 acres or 50 acres, the analysis is done by each one of those, and that's where the council is.
Clarify, I understand, we're trying to do it by ownership of lot too, right? So if a person owns a lot that's half agriculture and half rural, it's going to become one or the other, right?
That's
My
yeah,
understanding.
yeah.
So that might work, you know, today when, well, okay, this is now going to be agriculture, but the land next door is rural, and I decided to buy it. Now I have agricultural and rural. So are you going to just arbitrarily decide now that you bought this land, your land is going to change to rural because you're more rural than?
No. Let me go back. Can I just put a T on this thing just for a second? The intent, the objective of this exercise, as I think Bruce asked the other day, is there's a desire within the provincial policy statement, and I think there's a desire within this municipality to take the productive agricultural land and bring it into some sort of an entity that's less vulnerable to development. So instead of having little pieces that get eroded, you've got a larger, I call it a yellow paintbrush, but that's real true. We've also got the option of finding some little dabs of yellow, we'll talk about later. But at least it's taking it and doing something like what is called the green belt, but it's protecting productive agricultural land. Bruce and I want you to come back if you don't agree with it. You have some really good points. But the point is, it gets defined as that. And so if somebody finds something beside it that was outside of it before, it's outside of it after as well. But it's not that because somebody bought 100 acres and now they have 200 acres, it makes everything change. Not likely to change.
So why are we changing it now then? Like I know we're going around in circles, but you know, an example of someone who has 100 acres, 50 acres is rural, 50 acres is agriculture.
Yeah.
So there's a proposal to make it all rural. So I guess, what's the difference between leaving that 50% agriculture and 50% rural versus in 2 years, somebody with 100 acres of agriculture buying 50 acres of rural, then that owner has 100 acres of agriculture and 50 acres of rural.
The only thing we're trying to do, interpreting properly, is we're trying as a municipality, there was a desire to use an alternative method as recommended by the provincial policy statement to try to take our productive agricultural land and move it into a large unit that makes it less encroachable by development. And that by virtue, there are areas in there where you'll find an area of 49 acres of rural land. It could have been built on, but it's now got a yellow paintbrush over it, and it'll have a yellow paintbrush until somebody changes it. And give it to the guy who really knows what he's talking about.
Well, I was just gonna say, in terms of Ben's example, you know, you have the 100 acres and you live by the 50 acres that are rural. There's nothing that's gonna stop you as a farmer from farming that 50 acres of rural, if you think you can make a go, right? But what we're saying is that 100 acres that we're starting with, that's the world we're protecting, and that's what we want to protect. That's what we're saying, we're protecting that 100 acres. Now, that's why we're asking the committee, where should these boundaries kind of, it's almost like an accordion, where should they be squeezed in, where should they go out, which areas do you think are worth protecting? Because some of it doesn't necessarily have to be LEAR score driven and soils driven. OMAFRA will accept the rationale of the committee if you want to expand in certain places and contract in certain places. They're not going to simply say, well, LEAR score and that is 42, you don't get it. So that's why I say, look, your 100 acres versus your 50 acres, we're trying to make sure that the 100 acres is protected and that everybody's comfortable with, yeah, that 100 acres should be protected. And whether it's a LEAR score that says that's the rationale protected, or it's you guys that come up with the rationale to say that piece should be protected, it's designated as ag, versus that other 50. Like I said, there's nothing going to stop somebody from farming that 50 in the future if they think they can make a business venture of it or make it work. But we're just not going to say include it for the sake of including it for the future. Does that?
And there's nothing to stop them from trying to have a rezoned ag.
Shouldn't be. Right.
So,
I mean, I think the most significant part really here is when we take some of the rural land that somebody has no intention of farming, and we include it in for the sake of the rationale that the committee comes up with, and that person loses severance rights because now it's agriculture. That's where we're gonna, and this is why Lawrence is focused on process, but I'm thinking down the road when someone said, why did you do that? And I go, I don't know.
Yeah.
I want the paperwork from you guys to say, well, a committee discussed this, and this is the rationale.
You see, I'm getting calls from people who have agriculture that's becoming rural. And they don't want it, because they have no intention of ever settling lots. And they feel strongly about protecting agricultural. One woman in particular who calls me almost every day with an update. You know, so there's two sides to that, and it's how you get to everybody, you know, in line and understanding what you're doing.
But I think that goes back to, you know, you guys can, if you think that parcel of land being protected is justifiable for whatever the reasons are, then we expand it out. And like I said, this is some of the questions that we're asking right now with general piece is, look, we follow the approach and we've expanded it out to the river here, and look, we got a bunch of residential land, right? Now, I know there's a couple of other examples Gabriel wants to show us right now, but that's some of the things that we're saying, does this make sense? Now, your example, maybe you'll talk about that one, maybe that one won't make sense.
And I think there is that other parcel discussion that I think we want to run on the side here, and that's the possibility that you've got a segment of good productive farmland that is way outside of this circle. And so we may want to recommend to owners that be put in as productive farmland. It's not part of this package, it's part of a secondary decision that would be part of the whole thing.
One other question I got asked was, is a maple sugar bush considered agricultural or rural?
Do you happen to have an address for that?
Well, you wouldn't.
So Gabrielle, that would actually,
They haven't submitted anything yet, but I think they will.
But if you start off with the soil type is what is determining the LE, or the most the LE. And so what's underneath that wood is the determinant that will put the first 70% in the
Probably
soil.
rock.
So if it's rock, it'll be rock, and that won't be very high.
I know that Fulton's 400 acres square area, but because the soil has.
Now, should we be talking to them and scoring it high? That's, you know.
Well, no, that's not the way I think this works. Do we talk to them to score them high? No, you don't change the scoring. You say, listen, that should be included
Sorry.
for these reasons.
Yeah, I heard the inappropriateness of my statement.
But yeah, so like, this is why I say like,
Or both.
this LEAR scoring and things like this has gotten us so far down the road. It's not gonna be 100%. So all we do is we accept it and then we make the changes we want. Right?
Bruce, you're on.
So the question is, I have to try to understand in terms of, you talk about 100 acre parcels. Is that the base, the 100 acre parcels, or what?
No, we're at 250. Right?
Yeah, okay.
It's it's 250 hectare blocks,
I'm
but
just-
that's just a guideline.
At what point do you think that if we say we shrunk it to a specific, say 50 acres or whatever, that would satisfy a lot of these issues? So, do you not think 250 is a little bit for Lander County?
the more we bring that number down, the more lands we're going to have, right? The 250 is kind of already limiting certain areas from not being in.
Yeah, I just wondered if it makes sense lowering it to a point where you find an equilibrium. Like there's a bit of a push and pull right now, but you know, relative to the area you're dealing with, like we aren't dealing with flats of Essex County. But is there a spot where you can bring it down just to 200, 150, whatever, that would satisfy a lot of these issues?
So it's actually 250 hectares. So let's just make sure we talk right dimensions here, acres and hectares. But like I said, the 250 is a guideline from WMAFRA based on our region. And that's the size of area. Now, that doesn't mean that individual farms are that size. It could be 100 farms of a 10-acre size, for example. It's really, at what point is there a large area that is not agricultural? Like Mr. Kelly was saying, you know, we're not looking at protecting individual properties and the 60 or 70% of those farms. We're looking at protecting large areas, and we acknowledge, and so does the province through its definition, that it includes those poor pockets and those adjacent lands. And the idea isn't only farming, but it's also, you got to keep in mind, it's also the MDS2 component. So it's also to avoid conflicting land use in these areas. That's the biggie, and that's what a lot of the farmers were telling the province back when they changed the definition, was that they want to find a way to protect larger areas, even if they're not being farmed at 100%, but is to avoid having city folks come in and then have conflicting land uses.
Mark, I have a question, like, and it refers back to that last example that Gary had up when we were pulling all these residential lots along the river into it, and if the rationale for that is that we're defending against future conflicting land uses. I mean, we have the Farm Protection Act in Canada that governs the rights of farmers against those kind of encroachments. So do we really need to be designated them as prime, like, because they become prime, does that mean they?
So the problem that is, from a land development point of view, is if we're not, in terms of the consent rights, unless we're prohibiting all consents in the rural area, and if it's not designated, you still have the potential for there to be rural consents and rural residential development in close proximity to farms. So that's one of the big reasons why we're looking at protecting what's called, you know, the adjacent lands, where you used to just be using the class 1, 2, 3, which is why you see these meandering belts. By default of the definition of including the adjacent lands, we're now looking at larger tracts of lands. So we basically ignore the lot lines, and it doesn't mean that the farms themselves have to be 40 hectares. We you know, the ministry does acknowledge smaller farms. They even acknowledge farms on surplus dwelling lots, believe it or not, which could be like a 1 hectare farm. But at the end of the day, they're looking at really protecting the large tracts of land, and the ministry feels that 40 hectares is the right number for our areas, and that these blocks of 250 are the right areas. Now it's up for us to apply or implement that guideline through the methodology as we have, but then to work with the community and this ag community to see whether or not, like Mr. Kelly was saying, are the edges, did we extend them out too much in certain areas to follow that guideline, or did we miss areas that should be in just because of the fact that they're not scoring 66 plus, right? So there is some fine lines that we do have to use, or else it's no longer a tool, right? Just to answer the previous question there, I do have the PPS in front of me, and to answer that maple syrup production question, that is a permitted use on prime ag lands, and in mills, agricultural uses are permitted throughout the rural area. So basically anywhere that's not within a village or urban area, that use would be permitted.
Can we go back to Bruce's question for a minute, because I don't know whether you're telling me that it's the law, or you're telling me you don't want to do sensitivity analysis within your system. All Bruce is asking is to illustrate a little more colorfully, perhaps, the sensitivity analysis of what would happen if we went from 250 to 225 or 200, and just understood better what that meant as an eventuality for what we're trying to do here. Because the 250 is a very comfortable number for Middlesex County. There's no question about it. It's a very uncomfortable number, possibly, for Lanark County. I don't know. I mean, this, if you take this LEAR process and apply it to the rest of Lanark County, you're going to have more trouble here on. And so I think, you know, can we keep that question on the table for a little bit? Mark and Gabrielle, can you tell us either a little more clearly, or give us the time of your people to just adjust the computer at some time and show us what happens when you went 200 hectares or 25 hectares or something, so we know the answer to that question of why are we adhering to the ministry's guideline of 250 hectares?
Well, we can, but we'd be running an absurd amount of scenarios depending on if we're not fixing the number. And again, the question is whether or not we're able to get OMAFRA on board with that, because the methodology now is accepted by the ministry. So for sure, we can run the model. Again, the model requires timing, and something we're gonna have to talk to Mr. Kelly about. But I think what we would prefer looking at doing is seeing these areas, whether or not, and most areas are not 250, most areas are more than 250, but it's to see whether or not that 250 or more is including lands that shouldn't be, or is missing lands that should be. And but just bring, we don't mind running it to 200 or 150 or 50. Again, it's something we'll have to talk to Mr. Kelly, because it's just going to be an infinite amount of work. It's never going to be ending. But we'd rather use the guideline as it is now and apply sensitivity being local knowledge to the question, or even just, reviewing the works and reviewing whether or not the committee chooses to do a drive, or just work with the maps and satellite imagery or whatever it is. We don't want to dictate how you propose your recommendations to us, but we'd rather review the 250 now as proposed than start making a whole bunch of other scenarios.
Exactly, because I think, when we look at these block sizes, even if we look at scenarios that consider smaller blocks, it will kind of serve as a blanket of designation, right? Including and excluding properties. So even if we had a larger or smaller block, it would potentially include and exclude properties that aren't appropriate. So I think what might make more sense, as Mark had indicated, is looking at which properties have been maybe inappropriately added as a proposed prime agricultural versus excluded from that, if that makes sense. So I mean, what I'm hovering over here may be a good example of both.
Say that.
So
Sorry, I'm just going to take chair for a top of that for a minute, because on the one hand, you just said we can move the purple line away from the river, even though the ministry said for the river, and on the other hand, the ministry said 250 hectares, and we can't change it. What is the logic of the difference between those two statements?
So the ministry is all right if we come back with public comments in support of removing or adding parcels to the proposed prime ag. But generally what they consider at just say this high level stage is the 250 block designation. However, they aren't opposed to some being included or excluded because you know, local residents or when field work is done, you know, the properties do in fact seem suitable despite not being part of that 250 hectare block, or aren't suitable despite being included within it. So maybe I could provide some additional examples just to illustrate that point. So just again to reiterate, this purple line is just indicative of the proposed prime ag. So everything kind of in this case southeast here is being proposed for prime agricultural designation. And this lighter area here indicates an area that was prime ag currently, or is prime ag currently, and is not being proposed to stay prime ag. So here are a few good examples of properties that may not be suitable for prime ag despite being part of a 250 hectare block. So you can see here that out of a total 100 possible points, some of these are scoring 15 or 37, right? So that's a pretty low overall score. So and you know, I'm sure their use right now is residential. So there's a lot of reasons to support not proposing these as prime ag just based on their total LEAR score and their current use. However, perhaps even though, you know, this parcel here isn't part of a 250 hectare block, you know, it is scoring relatively high, very close to that 66 point threshold. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why my screen went blue. And you know, it has a relatively high soil classification score. You know, it has a large parcel size, that sort of thing, and overall its qualities contribute to an overall high score. So that might be a good example of an area that your committee might want to identify as an area that should be proposed for prime ag. And these parcels here, you know, they clearly make up that outer edge of a 250 hectare block. And, you know, this country road serves as a division between a proposed prime ag block versus lands that will remain rural. So I think identifying areas like this where, you know, certain properties don't make the strongest candidates for proposed prime ag, or those that might and aren't currently being included in that proposed prime ag area, would be a really great a great way to start off this process. So I think focusing on our efforts on these sort of parcel by parcel identification would be a better use of time than trying different hectares, because even if we do look at different hectare size blocks, so just say we go in with a 50 hectare block as a recommendation, you know, there might still be parcels like this that are included and parcels like this that are excluded, despite you know, how some are clearly maybe better as rural and some are clearly better as proposed prime ag. So that's just an idea of how we could focus our efforts.
Agree, because I think they're going to example. I have some questions to the table right now. Yeah.
Sure. I'm looking at two areas, concession 6 and concession 7 of Pakenham Ward, lots 1 to 7 in both cases. I'm wondering why those would be excluded.
Sorry, was that lot 7?
It's lots 1 to 7.
Oh, okay.
Concession 6 and 7.
Okay, sure. What I'll do is I'll go to one of those and we can start there. So is this generally one of the areas you're looking at? I'll zoom out a little bit, that way we could get a better sense of where we are. So it brought me to about here.
Concession 6 and 7. Lots 1 through 7 in both cases.
This is, so this is lot 1, concession 6. in the Pakenham ward.
Okay, so the next 3 lots there have really high scores.
So like these ones here, correct?
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at the LEAR score per evaluated parcel. I can't
Oh,
translate to the other one.
no problem. Let's see. What are those being scored as?
Well, like,
Does it indicate that, or
lot 2 would be scored at 66 to 80. Lot 3 and 4 would be scored at 80 to 99. There's kind of a block there, those 2 concessions. There seems to be a chunk that seems to score reasonably high with some anomaly there. And I'm just wondering why they would be excluded.
Sure. So maybe I'll take this area as an example because it's very consistent with what you had described. So that's high scoring parcels that aren't currently being proposed for prime ag.
Okay.
And so let me just press here and see what's indicated. So, you know, you're right, like in terms of parcels, so the AR factors, the area review, it's scoring high in terms of conflicting land uses. There aren't very many around. It's completely being used as farming. It has a large parcel size and it has fairly good soils. So in this case, this parcel that's being scored 92 on 100 isn't included because I think the surrounding parcels are very low scoring. So, you know, you see 12s, 19s, 20s. And so it doesn't really seem to be part of that 250 hectare block approach. But I think it's important to note as well that you know, it is just one highly suitable parcel kind of on its own. You know, it does have this neighboring one that's 82, but together they're fairly isolated in space. And so, you know, it's the provincial direction to have large areas of land that are agricultural. And in that way, you know, you have this buffer of other properties that serve to contribute to that goal of agriculture and therefore will likely not become areas with conflicting land uses and trigger MDS. So in this case, you have 2 parcels that are high scoring, but they're on their own. So they don't really fit that whole 250 hectare approach. And even if we did go to a much smaller, you know, hectare block approach, it would still likely not be a candidate for that reason. But again, you know, that doesn't mean that these can't be farmed on their own. There's nothing stopping that whatsoever. And to be fair, so what you're seeing, this green overlay here, is indicative of a rural or agricultural overlay. So it's not even being designated as prime agricultural right now.
So the 2 blocks that I'm looking at, it looks like there's 20 100-acre farms and over 10 of them are scoring 51 or higher. Like Scott, this would be right in your area.
Yeah, that's not sure.
Yeah.
Does Gabrielle have names? Some of us have names we can,
Yeah, like I can tell you who lives there, what the farms are like.
yeah.
Or
That's fine.
I can't search by name, but what might be most helpful is just like an intersection that's well known, and that way I could locate it that way.
Well, it'd be Cedar Hill Road and Sugar Bush Road, yes.
Okay, so I'm on Sugar Bush now. I think maybe we can try, would it be north of Cedar Hill?
Yeah, yeah, Cedar Hill Road.
Okay,
I guess
so no.
I'm thinking there's a lot of good farmland right in there that's going to be excluded. And these are the farmers that 5 or 10 years from now are going to have 50 rural lots around them that people don't want them to farm. And I think we should be trying to avoid that if we can.
Right, right. I see your point. I think what might be tough in a situation like that, and I could definitely raise that with Mark, but it's just that there are a lot of properties around those that are very low scoring and aren't suitable for agricultural. So, you know, I think the designation of these properties would require us to designate properties that aren't suitable, if that makes sense, in order to create these large areas and create buffers around those properties. Because, you know, like I said before, there's nothing stopping those farmers from farming their land. But, you know, what triggers the MDS and you know, is a source of concern for the province is that, you know, neighboring properties will be developed and, you know, and will include conflicting land uses. But, you know, like, let's just say this property, for instance, it's near properties that are large, that are currently being farmed, have good soils, etc. But, you know, in order to protect this large parcel that would be very good farming, you would need to extend that designation beyond the property in order to create that buffer needed by MDS. And it wouldn't necessarily make sense to just say designate this parcel because the soils are very weak, it's very small. You know, it's currently like covered with forest. So it has a very low score, right? So in order to protect these lands fully via a prime agricultural designation, it would have to comprise more than the property itself, including properties that aren't suitable for agricultural designation.
Yeah.
But I guess if you flip it around, you know, if we're talking right now that we give up prime agricultural land so people can develop, let's flip it around. Let's not allow building in this area so people can farm. You know, I think this whole thing needs to be challenged. This does not suit. And has there ever been a challenge to the Minister of Agriculture from this area saying, this doesn't work here? It doesn't.
Around the table, that's all.
Well, I guess like Gabrielle was addressing the Cedar Hill area, like we already have an existing dairy farm there. So how are we addressing that if it's not going to be prime agriculture? Scott and I were speaking about that this morning. That's not prime agriculture, but it is an existing dairy farm. That is, and I don't know what he's milking now, probably 40 cows, give or take maybe. So, and it extends the land that we know, it used to be a tree or berry farm and now a tree farm, I think. There's a significant amount of land in that Cedar Hill area, that's the one we're speaking to now, that is not going to be prime agricultural land. I'm not suggesting it is, but by the same token, we certainly don't want development sprinkled out through there on the dairy farm. I think there's definitely referring to. So how do we address that?
I understand they can still farm it, but it's what's gonna happen around it.
Yeah, yeah.
Or what happens when the helper retires and which could be a year from. And decides to start selling off that land and.
Yeah.
So
When we pull off Gabrielle's process right now, Ken, but I know this one is in the craw of everybody in this room, and either we register on the chalkboard and come back to it, or we put it down as we put it down somewhere in the list of the next we have to discuss. This is we're different than Middlesex County issues that is in the craw of everybody.
I was just trying to place it on the map and see, you know, is there kind of a Lego block approach that you can kind of get to some of these sites? But, you know, again, when you're talking about the dairy farm, the kind of question that comes back to this purpose, is it protecting a farm no matter where the farm is, because it's a farming operation, or is it protecting the characteristics of the land that it's on? So for instance, you know, we can put a greenhouse on a rock. Doesn't make it worth protecting from a farming standpoint. You know, the agriculture, the dairy farm doesn't necessarily have to be on prime ag land. It can be on less suitable soil.
I think this room is looking at the land, not the dairy, not the cow. That's had other activities, agricultural activities on it.
I think most of that green stuff in there, that's all spots on the.
So like, I think, you know, we kind of got to walk a line here between the farms that are probably, or the operations that are in areas that really don't have, that nobody would go in and really farm as such, right? But they are operations. Versus,
No,
let's look at the, let's look at the areas.
It-
No, just hear me out. So is there, do you kind of include those when they're close to an area that does have the characteristics that you're looking at protected? Like, I think this area that we're talking about here, I mean, I can see Deb's just point, like, when you're looking at, they're outside the proposed boundary, if I have it right.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're storing in the dark brown areas there. Yeah, and this is the soil map, so I mean, like, they're at 61 to 70, I mean, you don't even have to touch the AR portion, these are almost in already, right? But they're outside the boundary, like, if I got my glasses and my Bible, right up here, right? You know?
Yeah.
And,
Big chunk right there.
what I was wondering is, you know, I guess, what size or can you, like I said, kind of like lock those together, it's like, this is an area, right?
Yeah,
And it might be discontinuous, like, it doesn't have to be that, I think you drag the purple boundary out, taking everything. I think Lauren asked, you know, can you have an island, I think is what it is, right?
but I think this is the question that's on the table, and if the possibility of having islands, which I think is maybe a good way of defining what we're talking about, is a possibility for discussion, then I would propose in the room here that we actually take the island discussion and put it on a shelf for right now and get some of Gabrielle's process, because I think there's a LEAR process that I think probably is going to happen. And maybe it is, maybe we're going to tee it up too, but I don't think so. But sorry, I got more of a chair. Sorry, but in giving some deference to what we're trying to accomplish here, if we can take the island issue and put it on a shelf, and go back to Gabrielle's general question, see if we can accomplish some of those, and see how that works, and then come back to the island at another time. That's okay with the people here. It is not, Bruce, would that work for you? All right. Okay. Then can we give the table back to Gabrielle, but Jennifer has reported that islands are still on the shelf for discussion.
As long as we can remember what we're talking about. Perfect.
Oh, they'll remember. They'll remember.
Just by the way, it's about 10 to 2, so when was your
2:30.
your hard stuff?
Yeah. So we'll extend to 20 minutes. Let's go on 4 minutes and then move on to the door. Okay. Gabriel? Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, just one of the questions, like, we talked about this, an example that's not in, but it's close to the development, is the village of Pakenham. You go to the village of Pakenham at Wabba Road. The lands to the west of aren't included in this thing, but, and we all know there's significant lands. There's a couple of two major dairy farms in there right now. But then again, we're abutting a residential development in that's the golf course development. So this is just strictly a hypothetical question. What are we trying to do by taking that land out? Are we out of the process? It's right now it's it. And so right now it's prone to I guess lights or whatever how you want to do based on the residential component next door. So that's the other extreme. We have to decide what, do we keep our criteria so strict that we have to have some flexibility there. We can maybe get back to what Mark and Gabriel was saying, from we designate areas, going around the whole map, we know the areas. We designate, okay, they gotta go. And so other areas, they have to go. Is that going to be sufficient enough to satisfy all the issues? But that's going to take a lot of work on it. Everybody's part, just to designate areas to try to in and out of this, because these are things. But then it goes totally against the 250 hectare exact model.
Yeah.
It's totally against it.
Yeah.
So at what point do you? That's what I said. Is there some process that we can come by that we can massage to fit what the ultimate goal? To fit the ultimate goal is to protect the islands, the island parcels, protect the farming opportunities, yet allow development to an extent. Because I think that's, what we're finding with the ag population in there. That people who live beside residential areas and all this stuff, they see what the opportunity would be in the future for generations to sell their land for development, like so that. Yet you see these farms that want to maintain that historical presence and maintain the opportunity to grow. So I think that's the ultimate question. I think right now, the provincial policy statement is there to try to protect those ag lands, but they're still conflict. And how do you prevent that? How do you address that conflict and opportunity? Give everybody an opportunity. And I throw a lot of questions in here, but I don't know. I don't know the answers. I don't even know what LEAR is the answer personally.
Yeah.
Do they complicate things, Mark?
Let's not lose that piece of land either for a question, but can we get back to Gabriel for a few minutes?
Yeah.
Sorry, Gabriel, when we get back, give you the table here for a few minutes.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
You want to pick another example somewhere? They want another example for this festival?
Sure, I could look up another example. One quick note though is that I have another meeting at 2, so I'll have to leave sometime soon, unfortunately. So here may be another strong example of areas that are improperly or are not appropriate for prime agricultural designation. So you see some small residential properties here that make up a 250 hectare block for designation. But they are very low scoring, as you can see, some scoring 0. And so that might be an area we want to review for exclusion.
Your sound quality is really dropped off, Gabby.
Gabrielle, the sound has really gone bad all of a sudden.
Okay, sorry, let me just try my headphones again.
The speaker past that.
That's the Indian Hill area.
Hope so, my body's kind of there. I know it's-
Is this better?
Can you talk a little more?
Yeah, is this better at all?
Yes, yep. That's
Okay,
okay.
great. So yeah, as I was saying, this is just an area that may be suitable for exclusion from the proposed prime ag designation, just given their very low scores and their current use as current or proposed use as residential. You can see that there's single detached dwellings on the majority of these properties.
Can you give us a better location on that one, Gabrielle?
That's Indian Road.
Indian Hill Road, okay, everybody comfortable where we are?
Yeah, so this is on Indian Hill Road,
Yeah.
and it's near County Road 29, just north of that.
Agree with that, Dave?
No.
Well, I think she put that as a question.
place there, isn't it?
She's not asking for an answer today, but she's giving it as an example, because we've got to provide them. And again, I think it's you can get in trouble, you can stay out of trouble with it. Where you go.
So I think the identification of areas like this where there has been a proposal for a prime agricultural designation, or areas that are currently being proposed for rural that may be more suitable for prime ag would be, I think, a great priority at this point. And so what we can do, what Mark and I can do, is share the link with you to this resource so that you could either have the option to delineate areas on the physical maps that were provided or on this online source. And when you click the parcels, you could acquire the additional information. So that maybe all properties have a roll number, but others will also have a municipal address in addition to the roll number. So if you wanted to make a list of properties to assess, that might be a good way of doing so.
Angela, you probably have some opinions on this one you can put on the table right now.
Well, I don't know, it's interesting because it's, again, I guess I'm still confused about identifying those particular areas. Because and it's more pronounced up, and I think Gabriel will attest to that, up Macquarie Side Road where you've had a number of emails back and forth with the owner specifically to that, and it's addressing where the golf course is and the abattoir and the land that's in between there. And I think you've had about 3 emails back and forth, Gabrielle, is that correct, in reference to that?
I personally haven't had those yet, but Mark might have.
Okay.
So we've got some,
Just a minute there.
so where is, so the line is at the river, there's prime agricultural land between the river and that questionable area, is that right?
It's wetland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, I go by the line, yeah, but I see this green area.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be good agricultural land?
I don't know, pretty narrow.
Yeah, so it's this area here that's being proposed for agricultural designation and also across the river.
Maybe somebody needs to approximate the large line, what would happen if we did this area?
If you look at the red,
So what I can do is
I'm just gonna walk around for a second. I just want to point out, and I think this is a good illustration here on that. If you're looking at your land evaluation soil capacity score map, so up, yeah, you're right there. Right? You're right there. Lauren, you see where we are? Right there.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I think I have to disconnect at this time, just given that I have another meeting. Are there any questions before I go, or is there anything I could provide via email before I go?
So can I just, your office is going to provide the list of opinion questions in kind of a moving way. And we're going to provide us access to this map with this information on it. Probably, would you be providing some, maybe we should be looking at this location, et cetera, or some help? Because I think what this group has is some homework before the next meeting, if they can, is to look at these maps, look at the questions as you pose them, and be able to come back and discuss these with a bit more knowledge in the next meeting. Does that make sense to you, Ken? Okay, so we're looking for you to feed us as many questions as you can to make sense, Gabrielle, and we will schedule a meeting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, it almost seems that we need to meet and discuss those questions and come up with what we see as a strategy to make these type of meetings with planning work.
But I think we need those people there because we're gonna have questions just as soon as we start talking.
I don't know. I think it's a chance for us to really talk at our level about it.
I'm game. I don't want to have too many meetings with these people. You're all valuable people.
I do.
I do. Great. Bruce, thank you. Okay. Then let's get to the point of adjournment here. Sorry, before we do, Gabrielle, thank you. I know you have to go on that meeting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to review. We really appreciate it.
Do we want a short roundtable comment or have we had them already within our commentary? Denzel?
Yeah, I think we've had them.
Scott? You're okay? Anything else?
Yeah, I'd just like to some time to drill in and look at all these comments.
Okay.
Stuff to do on next batch.
Bruce?
Yeah, it's interesting on the comments. Look at the comments, they're all comments. Majority of the areas of this, it's for the
the names of people who actually got letters saying that their land is changing. And just because I know one of my neighbors who's quite elderly got a letter and threw it in the garbage.
Well, I mean, that list, the mailing list is about 600 or 700. So the letters went out to 600 or 700 parcels. I mean, I can't see why you can't have that list. One, like I said, there was piled up switching from, there was two letters, right? There was if your land was going from ag to rural, and there was a letter if you were going vice versa. rural to ag.
So should we have a list of that, like, these are the ones who are going to mine to rural? And would also give us an idea, like, it's all right to talk about lots and concessions, but lots of us know these private people's names.
So what are we for local knowledge? I mean, that is a data list, have a look at it about, we need to share it. I mean, as a member of council, perhaps we can have a look at what that list looks like. It seems like something we should have a look at then, sure.
Maybe Gensler, you and I could look at it.
Yeah, and the names are important because you can look at concessions, but it doesn't mean anything until you see a name and you know exactly the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything you further around? Oh,
I'm just gonna drop off, but if there's any more questions or comments, just feel free to email them my way or Mark's way.
okay, Gabrielle.
All right, okay, bye for now.
And just to clarify, the letter was not only from rural to ag and ag to rural, but also rural and partial ag to rural or ag partial rural. So the partial properties were also captured in that.
Yeah, it was like 650 or something. I think Jen, we put together, whatever.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Adjourned. You need a name for adjournment, Gary?